The American Revolution, 1775 to 1783, began as tensions between Britain and its 13 American colonies over taxation and governance. The colonies resisted British taxes like the Stamp Act and the Tea Act, which led to the Boston Tea Party in 1773. In 1775, armed conflict erupted at Lexington and Concord, marking the war's start. The Second Continental Congress convened, appointing George Washington as commander-in-chief. The Declaration of Independence, penned primarily by Thomas Jefferson, was adopted on July 4, 1776. The war saw key battles: the Continental Army's surprise attack in Trenton, New Jersey, 1776, and the pivotal American victory at Saratoga, 1777, which secured French support. After years of grueling combat, Washington's forces, with French aid, trapped British General Cornwallis at Yorktown, Virginia, in 1781. His surrender effectively ended major fighting. The Treaty of Paris, 1783, recognized U.S. independence. The Revolution inspired global democratic movements. National expansion and reform, 1815 to 1880. Between 1815 and 1880, the United States underwent significant expansion and reform, transforming the nation. After the War of 1812, westward expansion surged, spurred by the Louisiana Purchase in new territories like Texas, Oregon, and California. The 1820 Missouri Compromise attempted to balance free and slave states as expansion reignited debates over slavery. The 1830 Indian Removal Act led to the forced relocation of Native Americans along the Trail of Tears, a tragic consequence of manifest destiny. The annexation of Texas in the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848, added vast western lands, fulfilling expansionist ambitions but intensifying sectional divisions. Reform movements blossomed during this era. The Second Great Awakening inspired campaigns for temperance, women's rights, education, and abolition. Activists like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman fought slavery, while leaders like Elizabeth Cady Stanton championed women's suffrage. By 1880, the U.S. was a sprawling nation, grappling with the promises and conflicts of its rapid growth. The Civil War, 1861 to 1865, began when Southern states, fearing limits on slavery, seceded after Abraham Lincoln's 1860 election. 11 states formed the Confederacy under Jefferson Davis. Hostilities commenced on April 12, 1861, when Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina. Early battles like Bull Run, 1861, revealed the war's scale. The Union, under leaders like Ulysses S. Grant, aimed to preserve the nation and later abolish slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation, 1863, redefined the conflict as a fight for freedom. Key battles included Antietam, 1862, the war's bloodiest day, and Gettysburg, 1863, a turning point. The Union's blockade weakened the South, and William Tecumseh Sherman's march to the sea devastated Confederate resources. After relentless campaigns, Robert E. Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9, 1865. The war ended slavery but left the nation scarred, shaping Reconstruction and civil rights battles for decades. In the late 19th century, the United States transformed into an industrial giant. The 1870s to 1900s marked a period of rapid economic growth, driven by technological innovation, urbanization, and the rise of powerful business magnates. Key industries such as steel, oil, and railroads flourished, with figures like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller at the helm. Carnegie's steel empire revolutionized production with the Bessemer process, while Rockefeller's Standard Oil dominated the petroleum industry. The expansion of the railroad network, led by men like Cornelius Vanderbilt, linked the nation and stimulated commerce. Cities grew as factories attracted millions of immigrants, but labor conditions were often harsh. Workers faced long hours, low wages, and unsafe environments, sparking strikes and the rise of unions. Monopolies thrived, leading to public outcry and the eventual passage of antitrust laws like the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890. By 1900, the U.S. was an industrial powerhouse, shaping the global economy. World War I, lasting from 1914 to 1918, saw the United States enter the conflict in 1917. Initially neutral, the U.S. was drawn in due to German unrestricted submarine warfare, notably the sinking of the Lusitania in 1915 and the Zimmermann telegram, where Germany proposed a military alliance with Mexico. President Woodrow Wilson called for a declaration of war in April 1917, marking the USS formal entry into the war. American troops known as the American Expeditionary Forces, AEF, led by General John J. Pershing, fought alongside Allied forces, primarily in France. The war featured trench warfare, new technologies like tanks and chemical weapons, and massive casualties. U.S. support, including supplies, troops, and financial aid, helped tip the balance in favor of the Allies. By November 1918, the war ended with an armistice. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, placed heavy reparations on Germany and reshaped global borders. The U.S. emerged as a leading world power. The Great Depression, spanning from 1929 to 1939, was the worst economic downturn in modern history. It began with the stock market crash on October 29, 1929, known as Black Tuesday. Speculation and overproduction had inflated stock prices, leading to a dramatic collapse. Unemployment soared, reaching 25%, and banks failed, wiping out savings. Industrial production plummeted, and agricultural prices collapsed, leading to widespread poverty. President Herbert Hoover initially struggled to address the crisis. In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt took office and implemented the New Deal, a series of federal programs designed to provide relief, recovery, and reform. The Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, and the Works Progress Administration, WPA, created jobs, while Social Security was established to support the elderly and disabled. The Depression persisted until World War II, which spurred economic recovery. The crisis reshaped U.S. policies and society, establishing a stronger federal role in economic affairs and social welfare. World War II, 1939 to 1945, was a global conflict that involved over 30 countries. The United States entered the war in December 1941 after Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Prior to this, the U.S. had provided material support to allies, including Britain and the Soviet Union, under programs like Lend-Lease. The war saw major Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, fighting against the Allied nations, primarily the U.S., Britain, and the Soviet Union. In Europe, Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, invaded multiple countries, eventually leading to the D-Day invasion in June 1944, which marked a turning point in the war. In the Pacific, the U.S. fought Japan in intense battles like Midway and Iwo Jima, ultimately leading to Japan's surrender after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. The war ended in 1945 with the unconditional surrender of both Germany and Japan. The U.S. emerged as a superpower, and the United Nations was established to promote global peace. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s was a pivotal period in American history, aiming to end racial segregation and discrimination against African Americans. The movement gained momentum after World War II, with the 1954 Brown v. Board of Education ruling declaring segregated schools unconstitutional. In 1955, Rosa Parks' arrest for refusing to give up her seat on a segregated bus sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. King, became a central figure in advocating for nonviolent protest. In 1963, the March on Washington, where King delivered his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech, highlighted the demand for jobs and freedom. The movement saw landmark achievements, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed discrimination, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which protected African American voting rights. These successes marked a significant shift in American society, but the struggle for equality continued beyond the 1960s.